How do professionals evaluate information online? How can this be helpful to your future career? Here we have advice from professors to help you evaluate reliable information. I know defines digital information literacy as the ability to find, evaluate, create and communicate information effectively and responsibly using the appropriate technology. I know teaches students digital information literacy skills to help prepare them to navigate the future of digital information.
In these videos, our I Know professors tell us how they relate the importance of finding and evaluating information to their profession. This is I Know Insights, faculty discuss information literacy in the professional sphere.
A good example that I like to give is in order to evaluate information, they have to understand what the information is actually saying to them, right? So we have in criminal justice a multitude of databases, right? We're like drowning in databases, which is a good thing. Numbers are a good thing to have access to. But I asked them, which database do you turn to? How do you evaluate this database versus this database, right? Which one's good? And so I play this activity in class where I say, Dr. Shaw woke up and I had a really bad day. And I say, what crime did Dr. Shaw commit? And so they have a lot of fun with this, which they actually have a little bit too much fun with this, I think, because then they're like, sometimes I commit arson, I commit robbery against Whataburger, I run over a jaywalker, you know, all these different crimes. And so I tell them I do this all in one morning, because again, Dr. Shaw had a really bad day. And then I asked them, which database would you use if you want to know what the most serious crime is? And so they have to understand what the Uniform Crime Report has versus National Incident-Based Reporting System versus the National Crime Victimization Survey versus all these different databases. So that was my long-winded way of answering your question, and that in order to evaluate information, they have to understand where the information's coming from. And so that takes walking them through these funny little exercises in order to understand, oh, okay, so if I want to know if there's more than one offender, I go to this database. Or if I want to know what the most serious offense was, I go to this database. And this is also really important in terms of evaluation, because I think currently, misinformation is rampant. And a lot of times students may turn to sources that are not valid, that are just breeding grounds for misinformation. But if they gain that skill set to understand and identify what is legitimate information versus misinformation, that's an invaluable skill set to possess, especially in criminal justice. The number one challenge I've had is many students will gravitate towards superficial characteristics of a source. So I'll give you an example. They'll submit to me as a reference something that looks like a news story, when in fact it's a fake newspaper. It doesn't even exist. And so they'll look at whether superficially it looks legitimate, or another thing that students have identified as something that they thought was indicator of reliability is whether it was shared a lot, which I didn't even think about. But they said, well, it was shared, you know, 1 million times and it's reliable, right? And I said, no, absolutely not. So as an example of that, I give them, there's this news story that was circulating all over social media. And I always say social media is the devil, but in this news story, and I say news story, it was that this woman had gotten arrested allegedly for breastfeeding in public. And so they looked at that and said, does it look legitimate? And hands down, every single, yeah, it looks legitimate. I say, okay, so I always say, put on your imagination hats and your imaginary shovel and let's dig through it a little further, right? So I asked them just to look through the article and highlight anything that might be a red flag. And many times they didn't find any red flags. They're like, it still looks legitimate. So there's 2 towns that were mentioned in this article, and it allegedly occurred in Wisconsin, right? And I said, did you Google the town? And they said, no. And I said, well, Google it. And then they realized it didn't even exist. The town was made up. And then the county that they referenced, it wasn't even spelled correctly as per the real county in Wisconsin. So I said, what does that tell you? And like, oh, well, that's a sign that it's not legit. Ding, ding, ding. So I'm having to work through I think the bias that social media has created, and we're so quick to multitask. Many people are on their phones, they're watching TV, doing homework, God knows what else, right? So we have to slow them down and have them actually work through the article and see what are the red flags that present, okay, you need to pump the brakes, this is not a legitimate source, versus some information that might be legitimate, they just have to dig a little bit further, even more so than just Googling a name, right? But again, that's a skill set that they develop through guidance and practice. So we like our criminal justice students to be as current as possible. And as everybody knows, the criminal justice system is facing some mighty big obstacles right now in terms of ethics, in terms of standards, in terms of training. And so one of the student learning outcomes that I have throughout several of my modules is use of force. I want them to know what use of force is. I want them to know the standards in place. So Tennessee v. Gardner, all those wonderful case law that exist to help them better understand these concepts that are thrown around very wildly, right? So in order to learn about use of force, I will instill with them the need for finding credible information. So I show them this chart, and there was this chart that went around the internet and in presidential debates in 2015. And it has these percentage, like white on white crime, white versus black crime, and it showed all this thing. And I asked them, how many of you saw this? And 98% of the class will raise their hand. I said, what is the problem with this? We're talking about use of force, and yes, it's a problem, but what about these numbers? Are they accurate? Is this something that you would cite for a paper? And at the very bottom, it says the Bureau of National Statistics, and nobody catches this. And I said, does this exist? And they all start laughing because they realize, oh my gosh, it doesn't even exist. There's no Bureau of National Statistics. And so it reinforces the use of force concept that is a learning objective that they understand and are able to explain the use of force standards, but also what sources to turn to support their understanding of use of force.